Hello and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan, and we're here to preview a huge matchup this weekend between South Carolina and the bye week.
Gamecocks favored by 90. I think they'll cover.
Yeah, I think they'll be all right. So we're gonna talk about some odds and ends, I guess, at this halfway point or a little over halfway point in the season. Maybe you could do a little bit of basketball preview. Last week was media days for men's basketball and women's basketball. And then talk about what else is going on in college football around the country this week before we transition to Texas A&M next week. They have a pretty big game this week as well. So, all right, I wanted to start somewhere silly. You ready?
Yeah, hit me.
True or false? South Carolina is the best 3-loss team in the country after 8 weeks of college football, right? 8 weeks, 9 weeks?
Yeah, this is week 9 we're getting into now here. I like the question. I like where you're going with this. This is the type of bye week stuff I like to hear, and I'm definitely not stalling to look up the rest of the 3-loss teams right now.
Well, I can throw some names at you if you want.
Okay, I'm looking. I got the standings pulled up now. So who else did you have in mind? I'm scanning the list now.
All right, so some names that kind of stand out to me: Georgia Tech's at 5-3. They've had a pretty good year by their standards. You got some SEC people in here. Florida's at 4-3. Arkansas's at 4-3. Oklahoma's at 4-3. I think we can knock them off the list.
I think you're. Yeah, you can say you're better than.
You got Louisville at 4-3. You got Michigan at 4-3. Probably a little surprising for those folks. Maryland at 4-3. We're gonna put South Carolina above them because I don't want any hate mail.
Okay.
Boston College at 4-3.
Louisville's got 3 losses.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of Louisville fans in this fan base next week.
You know what? I think South Carolina is the best 3-loss team. I'm going out on a limb.
Yeah, I'm just scanning this right now. Yeah, I think I'm probably with you. The only other one that I think really comes up is Louisville. I don't know. I know they have 3 losses. All these teams we're talking about do, but I don't know. They played Notre Dame pretty tough in South Bend for one of those 3 losses. But a 7-point loss. All 3 of their losses by 7 points. 2 of them against top 10 teams right now.
We're gonna find out. They haven't played Clemson yet, right?
That's the thing. Then next, they play BC, which is a battle of 3-loss teams this weekend. I think it's tomorrow. Actually, it's a Friday night game. And then they play at Clemson next Saturday.
So yeah, we're gonna find out.
I think it's probably, if we're doing this, South Carolina 1, Louisville 2. I'll go with that.
Yeah, I think Michigan's probably somewhere on that list. They have a decent win somewhere in there, but they've also looked pretty bad most of the year. What was their decent win? They had a close loss to Washington, but Washington's also got 3 losses. Yeah.
Yeah, USC's I think that's, speaking of 3 losses, I don't know if we have that on our staff picks, but Michigan State this weekend, which is always a fun rivalry game. Both with 4 and 3
Michigan
records.
State might actually have a shot for the first time in a few years.
I think it's a big house, though. But we'll get to other games later. I just noticed that one.
Yeah, anyway, I thought that was just kind of a fun, quick thought experiment
I appreciate it.
About where we're at. I think the national pollsters agree because, like we said earlier, even though it's only 1 vote, South Carolina is the only 3-loss team that made it in the top 25 or others receiving votes. So, there's people paying attention, or at least one guy paying attention. Some other mid-season stuff. So this weekend I wrote a article called 3 Things Still on the Table After the Bye Week. Look out for Kyle Kennard, who might have a chance at setting the single season record for sacks in school history. Do you know who owns the original?
Is it Clowney?
It is. It's a pretty obvious name, right? Jadeveon Clowney had 13 total sacks back in 2012, and Kennard's already at 8.5 sacks through 7 games. So he's got 5 more regular season games, and then maybe a bowl game. Although we'll talk about that in a little bit because I don't know if he might end up sitting that out or not, depending on what the bowl is, because he's also starting to get projected as a potential first round pick. But we're going to talk about the roster in a minute, so we'll talk about that later. As far as team sacks go, same year, 2012, there was a single season team record of 43 total sacks, and South Carolina is already at 28 team
28. Yep.
sacks right now.
I wrote for those of you who really like to dig in on sacks and kind of not just who gets the sack, but where the pressure comes from and kind of how things look schematically. I did a deep dive on the sacks on Tuesday. I looked at all of them. How much are they blitzing? How often are they in 3-3-5 versus 4-2-5 when they get a sack? Who's on the field? All that stuff. It's on Gamecock Scoop if you go back a couple days for subscribers.
Yeah, that was really insightful, and part of the reason that gave me the idea to look up all this stuff. And then also, and there's no easy way to look this up. I had to click through every single name on the top 50 sack leaders list, but I did it. Dylan Stewart has the most sacks of any freshman in the country right now.
Yeah, that does
and
not surprise me.
Yeah, his 4.5 sacks are tied for number 33 overall in the country. But yeah, he's the only freshman at all in the top 50 sack leaders in the country. So, got a pretty good one coming behind Kennard as well.
Yeah, I also saw, I don't know how much you've seen this week, but I saw, I think it was PFF's Twitter accounts that LSU hadn't given up a sack this year, which definitely has happened twice against South Carolina. Some South Carolina fans were getting on about that. I don't know where that. It was like none of. I think the stat was like none of LSU's offensive linemen had given up a sack. So I don't know if those both got credited as like team sacks or something. But
yeah, maybe it was like on a blitz.
Tonka Hemingway definitely both got home on Nussmeier in that game.
Yeah, that's. I mean, PFF. That's a lot of data. I don't even know how they do all the data. I feel like it's hard enough to get all the data for 32 NFL teams, but once they get to the college level, that's
also
pretty crazy.
Speaking of guys playing their way into an NFL conversation, Tonka Hemingway has been really good this year. I know it's easy to say that this week because he got the touchdown last week, but just in general.
Yeah, I don't know did you see the tweet? I wish I could find it again, but I think it's like 6 South Carolina defenders are in the top 100 in PFF or something like that.
Yeah, that
maybe
sounds
even
right.
higher than that. Yeah, there's quite a few that have been showing out. I think Jalen Kilgore was on that list. Nick Emmanwori was on that list. Debo Williams, I want to say, was on that. Or no, Demetrius Knight actually I think is above Debo Williams right now. Now, granted, he's played less snaps, but still. Yeah, I mean, we've seen it on the field, right? Best defense we've seen in a long time. They're number 2. I don't know if I said this a second ago, but they're number 2 in the country right now in team sacks with that 28 number. Kyle Kennard's leading the SEC in sacks. I mean, it's going well, at least.
So let's
in that aspect.
Let's talk about that a little bit. You mentioned the future a little bit before we got on here. It's early. It's week 9. There's 5 regular season games left, but kind of setting up this defense for next year while we're on the bye week and talking about it. You're going to lose pretty much all of those defensive tackles. I think for me, that's where it starts. We talked about that. I think on the last bye week, we discussed that a little bit. But you're going to have to do some major repairs at defensive tackle between recruiting and through the portal, I think, next year. You're going to lose Kennard. You're probably going to have to pay to keep Stewart around, but obviously he still has eligibility. And then you kind of look at that edge room too, where it's like, okay, Desmond Zulu's flashed a little bit. You'll get him back. I guess, what do you think? It's just starting up front, and I guess we can work backwards. How do you see this shaking out next year right now?
Yeah, and let's keep in mind that like there's still some weird COVID stuff for some of these guys. Like,
sure,
pretty much all of the seniors were class of 2021, so I think their freshman year they still got a COVID year or something. I don't.
Not 21. It was just 20.
So yeah, maybe only the 5th year guys right now have an extra. So maybe
TJ
we're actually
Sanders still has a year of eligibility.
Yeah, there's stuff like that. That's what I mean.
Boogie and Tonka don't, and DeAndre Jules doesn't.
So interesting, because Nick Barrett's the same class as TJ Sanders, so I assume he would too, or maybe it's a redshirt thing.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Looking at the edge room too, Kennard gone at the end of the year, Edmond gone at the end of the year. Brian Thomas Jr. and Jatius Gear both have one more year if they want it. And then obviously Umeozulu has 2. Dylan Stewart would have 2 before he's a top 5 pick in the NFL draft.
Where
And
where
Wendell,
do you have this info? Can you
just just my own notes.
Oh, I gotcha. Because yeah, I mean, I have like the depth chart and the years and stuff, but the years of eligibility part I'm not getting. So anyway, you can correct me as we go along. But defensive line right now for seniors, I have Nick Barrett, TJ Sanders, Elijah Davis, DeAndre Jules, Jerome Simmons, um, and then Tonka and Boogie, as you
Yep.
mentioned. I assume pretty much all those guys are gone, though maybe TJ Sanders comes back, although he's having a pretty good year too. Behind
Yeah.
them, as far as contributors go, you got Monkel Goodwine, who's played a little bit so far
Yep.
this
He's got another
year.
year.
What about DeAndre Jules, or is this
He
it for
does
him?
not.
Okay, so you're definitely gonna have to pick up some people in the portal. There. That's a room that you've been able to depend on for like 3 straight years. That's gonna just completely cycle out. So, and unfortunately, some of the younger guys that had upside that you had brought in there, like Xavier McLeod, did not want to wait or whatever went on there. So he's at Georgia now. I mean, when you look at the 2025 recruiting class, pulling it up now, they still haven't really addressed it much. I mean, Caleb Williams is a any outie sort of guy. That's a defensive lineman out of Virginia. Still wouldn't expect him to want to get thrust out there as a true freshman. So it's pretty clear that you're going to have to pull some guys from JUCO, pull some guys from the portal there. On the
Yeah.
edge, it's not quite as bad. So, like we said, I mean, you're going to probably have to figure out some NIL stuff with Dylan Stewart because people are going to come a calling. But Brian Thomas Jr. still has some more eligibility.
Mm-hmm.
Umeozulu, I think, actually had one of his better games as a Gamecock last week. He got some
Agreed.
late action there. So, if he keeps developing, that's at least 3 guys that you can start to depend on, but you'll probably try to find another Gear or Kennard. I mean, Kennards don't just grow on trees, but someone like that again in the portal as well. I think you can piece it together on the defensive line. You may not be quite as strong on the interior, but I think you might make up for that some with the linebackers. So, what are you seeing on who's coming back at linebacker next year? Maybe not immediate starters there either. Most of those guys are seniors. Debo Williams, Demetrius Knight,
Yeah.
Bengali Kamara's already gone.
Your big
But some of
3,
those young guys
Williams.
have a lot of talent.
Yeah, your big 3, Williams, Knight, Bam, they're all going to be gone next year. Mo Kaba somehow still has one more year of eligibility. I don't know how much you can count on him to play a lot of snaps, but he's there. The name for me, and we talked about him a little bit, is Fred J.R. Johnson, who's playing a lot as a true freshman this year. Not just like garbage time. Like he was in the game in the first quarter against Oklahoma last week. He was also, I noticed this from field level late in the game. He was wearing the green dot on defense, which is a really good sign for a true freshman. I noticed, I don't know if he was wearing it the whole time he was out there, but at least in the fourth quarter, when he was out there with kind of the second team defense, he had the green dot on. So him for sure. You start to bring Wendell Gregory along next year. And then I do think you're probably going to need some depth there. I also think it's, I don't want to say easier, but kind of easier to find linebackers than it is linemen in the portal, just in terms of, you look at what you were able to do this year at linebacker in the portal. So you
Yeah.
have
What?
names you like there. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think you have quite the story to sell transferred defenders after the way that Knight and Kennard are elevating their draft stock this year as well. And then in the 2025 class, there's a pretty strong linebacker class coming in too. You got Tayshawn Alston, you got Donovan Darden, you got AJ Holloway. Anthony Addison is a defensive end, but he might start off as more of a tweener. Jaquel Holman is likely to end up at linebacker or DB. So anyway, you got some names that are immediately coming in to help there as well. I'm not too worried about the linebacker between linebackers between what you caught coming back, who you have coming in, and then the potential of one or two guys in the portal. We didn't even mention Wendell Gregory, but he was a very high rated 4-star as well, who's a true freshman on the roster right now too.
Yeah, and then moving on to the secondary, obviously Nick Emanwuri and DQ Smith are both draft eligible. I really think Emanwuri's. I shouldn't say this. I haven't talked to him about it, but I've seen some early mocks with him as high as second round. I think if he keeps
I
playing
saw one
this,
in first this week. Yeah,
yeah. I think you probably can't count on him. DQ, maybe you get back for a senior year, but either way, I think you got to plan on some rotation there on the back end. But I also think you feel good about that, just given A, Torian Gray's track record, and B, what you've already seen this year. Peyton Williams has played a decent bit. David Busey's playing mostly on special teams, but he's flashed. He's forced 2 fumbles on special teams this year. It'll be a year 2 in the program for Kelvin Hunter and Jalewis Sullivan. You still have Jalen Kilgore, who's played some safety before. His brother Gerald, obviously. Probably going to want another corner because you're going to lose OD after this year, even though you do have Judge Collier and Vakari Swain. You're maybe for depth, if nothing else. But I think of the 3 levels, if we're just talking about how your defense sets up next year, this is the one you sleep the easiest about.
Yeah, my early guess, and this is just completely a guess based on what I've seen on the field and the sort of player I think he can be, would be, like you said, if Emanwuri opts to go to the draft, which seems pretty likely based on where he's being projected. DQ Smith isn't quite to that same level yet, so it wouldn't surprise me if he came back. So that's good. You have that as a crux point to build around. And then Jalen Kilgore wouldn't surprise me if instead of playing nickel, they put him at that other safety spot. And then you figure it out at nickel between linebackers and some of those younger DBs. Another name that we haven't talked about in a while, but Zabari Sandy, of course, missing this season with an injury, but he should be back. And then your highest rated, at least on Rivals right now, recruit, or one of the 3 highest rated, is DB Kendall Daniels out of Norfolk, Virginia. That's a 6'3", 180 guy that could play safety or corner, kind of built in some ways like Emanwuri was at that age. So I don't know. I in Torian Gray I trust, I guess. I think that's going to be fine as well. So looking at the defense overall, definitely going to be a step back. You don't just replace Kyle Kennard's production. You don't just replace all that veteran depth on the interior with the snap of a finger. But I do still think you have some explosiveness. And even if it struggles a little bit as you turn over, I think you can still be average on defense. And the thing that gets me excited is when you start looking at the offense. So do you want to turn the page to that?
Yeah, I think everybody knows what you got back at quarterback, obviously, with Lenore Sellers. Running back, you've spaced that room out pretty well, I think, kind of with resetting the way it looked after last year, but you're going to lose Rocket Sanders, Oscar Attaway, Juju McDowell. You're going to have to count on a Jawarn Howell and a Matthew Fuller next year.
No, probably.
Yeah, I think that's
target that in the portal as well. Again,
sure. And then where I think you feel really good is weird to say, probably wide receiver going into next year. It's going to be another year of a Nick Harbor, Matthew Bennett in year 2, and Dravius Jacobs as flash as a freshman. You've got some wide receivers coming in this class. It'll be DeBron Gatling in year 2, and even a Jared Brown still has one more year of eligibility if he wants to come back, especially after the injuries have already wrecked some of his season.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me actually. And I mean, you think about the 3 wide receiver contributors, and we haven't even gotten into tight end, where I think you feel pretty good too. But 3 wide receiver contributors from this year, Bennett, Harbor, and Jacobs are kind of the 3 guys that have started to step up. And yeah, you get all 3 of those guys back, and then of course you're pretty excited. And I think, as we've seen throughout the country, if you have a true freshman that's ready to go, I mean, even seen it on South Carolina's team with Mazeo Bennett, they can make an immediate impact. And you already have 2 4-stars in Malik Clark and Jordan Gidron committed for 2025. I still think you have a good shot with Donovan Murph, who maybe even has a little bit more upside than those 2 guys. So you bring in those 3 guys. You got guys like Brian Rowe and Jaden Sellers as well. I don't know that I think for once you might not feel like you have to do as much in the portal because the other thing that those guys bring is a little bit of height, which is something that you've been missing outside of Nicholas Harbor. Michael Smith has already flashed at tight end. I think you feel pretty good about him as a pass catcher going forward, another year in the program, all those sorts of things. And then the offensive line, I know people are disappointed with how it's gone. But if you can really kind of keep most of the young talent that you have together, we're talking about a junior Tree Babalade, a junior Marquis Anderson, a junior, um, where's my brain? Trovon Ball, sophomore Cam Pringle, sophomore Josiah Thompson, sophomore Blake Franks. And they've got a pretty good freshman class coming in again. I think you're really starting to see the depth and talent come together there. Now they have to produce, which thus far has been the struggle, but you can see the path, I guess, to that working out pretty well. And Lenore Sellers, taking a step forward and the offense being in a better place than it is this year. There'll also be the question, depending on how the next 5 games go, on if you make any staff changes or anything on that front too. But
Yeah, I think two things there. I think one, how much of this can you keep together? Just, I mean, again, I don't know. I don't have anything to like think it's going to happen per se. But does a Tree Babalade or a Trovon Ball or a Marquis Anderson basically didn't play at all this year? Do they look elsewhere in the offseason? I don't know, but maybe. And then the second part of that is you're going to have to replace 3 starters. There's no way around that, and all 3 of them are your interior guys. You're going to lose both guards here plus your center.
isn't Bell back
So
potentially?
I thought he was a 60-year guy. I have him down as. I thought he was done.
I know Torricelli Simpkins is done, but I thought Bell still had some eligibility left, but I could be wrong.
Can look into that later. But either way, I think it becomes a question of, do you try to build this through what you have? Like, do you get, a guy like Blake Franks who projects as an interior guy? Do you try to get him ready for next fall? Or is that, do you have to supplement in the portal again? I don't really know how that goes, but I think you feel better at tackle than you do at interior, but you're probably going to need at least one interior guy for depth purposes, if nothing else.
And you're right. This is his last year of eligibility. Bells,
yeah. So you're going to lose all 3 of your interior line starters after this year.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. I mean, I think you've recruited pretty well. I think they did a really good job finding Simpkins in the portal this past year. Maybe you can find another guy like that. But yeah, it's still imperfect at this point. But some of that will depend on how the next 5 weeks goes as well. For me, overall vibes, and I want to hear yours as well. I would give the defense a slight downgrade and the offense a slight upgrade. Maybe the defense more of a downgrade than I'm giving the offense an upgrade. So we'll see how that all sort of balances out. But you still have upside. And something that this defense has been really good at this year is disruption, getting pressure, causing turnovers. And I think you'll still have that upside with some of those guys that we talked about.
Yeah, I think my kind of overall thing is you feel okay about it in general, but the areas where maybe you don't feel as good about are really, really important ones. You're going to lose over 90% of your snaps, both interior D line and interior O line, and obviously that can make or break a team. So you feel good about wide receiver, quarterback obviously is the most important thing, tight end, secondary, but ultimately you're going to have to pretty much do a full revolving door on the interior on both sides of the line of scrimmage, and that's the biggest question you have when you start to set up 2025.
Well, luckily, we don't have to worry about that question just yet. There's still 5 weeks left in the 2024 season. South Carolina still has a lot of goals left on the table. Obviously, it starts with beating Texas A&M. I wanted to kind of think about the way that the SEC has played out through these first 9 weeks and try to project forward. Now we only have to project forward half a season instead of a full season, and lay out our SEC rankings or power rankings, however you want to do it, for what we think the end of the season is going to look like. So you want to start at the bottom, work our way up?
Sure. I think I know who we both have at 16. Would that be the Cowbell Crew in Starkville?
Unfortunately, although they played pretty well last week against Texas A&M, I can see the ways that they're improving. I think that
Sure.
their freshman quarterback, actually kind of similar vibes on him to Lenore Sellers, that he just doesn't have as much of a supporting cast as Sellers has had, but has some upside and has made some mistakes. But I think right now they're 0-4 in the SEC. I think they're going to get a win in the SEC before the season's over, but I think they'll still finish the
So
opponents.
I thought that too, and then I kind of looked at the schedule. I mean, they still have Arkansas, Tennessee, Missouri, and Ole Miss. Tennessee and Ole Miss are on
Ooh.
the road.
Okay, so they need to win this week.
I was going to say Arkansas this week feels like the one if they're going to get an SEC win. I'm with you. Tough spot. First year coach. Your QB went down for the season in September. There's just not much you can do with that. 15. Who you got?
Yeah, that's where it gets kind of interesting. I'm between Kentucky, Auburn, and Oklahoma. I'm going to go with Auburn at 15 right now. I feel like Kentucky has shown a little bit more fight up to this point. They at least have one SEC win, but they did just get blown out against Florida. And those two teams play each other this week, so we'll
They
find
do.
out which order they belong in. But for now, I'm going to say Auburn at 15.
It's such a screwy thing with Auburn where, like, you look at the yards and the efficiency and all the numbers that go into winning games, and you don't understand how they're 2-5, other than I think they lead the country in turnovers right now. Um, yeah, I have Auburn at 15. They don't have a league win. It's kind of a similar thing to State, where, like, if you don't get it this weekend, I mean, I guess they do get Vandy, but I don't know. Diego Pavia kind of owns them. He beat New Mexico State last year. Um, and then obviously the Iron Bowl at the end of the year. I think they still have to play A&M too. Yeah, I'll take Auburn at 15, and then I did have Oklahoma at 14. Maybe that's
Wow.
unfair to their defense. It's a really, really good defense, but I don't know. You fire your offensive coordinator, who's a program legend, former national championship winning captain in week 8. I think that kind of tells you where the situation is.
I'm going to agree with you. I have them there too, which would put Kentucky at 13. The main
Same.
reason I have Kentucky above Oklahoma is just the schedule. Oklahoma might not win another SEC game. They
It's
have a
Ole
really tough
Miss,
schedule.
Missouri, Bama, LSU, right?
Right. And at least Kentucky
Good
has
luck.
a shot this week against Auburn. I haven't looked at the rest of their schedule going forward, but I know that Oklahoma schedule is brutal. So, yeah, I have Oklahoma at 14, Kentucky at 13. I don't have much to say about Kentucky. South Carolina owns them apparently.
3 in a row.
Yeah. Who do you have above Kentucky at 12?
Yeah, I think this is where you really start to get into the middle of the pack and some of the struggles. This might be controversial. I think it's Arky at 12, even though they've played pretty well. I can see why you'd have them higher. I get it. Um, I don't know. I still think there's some deficiencies there just in general, and they're going to probably have to beat State this weekend just to make a bowl game. So Arky at 12.
Yeah, I have Florida at 12 and then
Okay.
Arkansas at 11. So, similar thought. Florida did have a nice win against Kentucky. Now they have a bye week. Um, I'm kind of surprised that the staff has stayed together up to this point, but
I'll
it
be
has.
honest.
So,
Like, I'm kind of Florida curious right now because they made a quarterback change and the offense has lit up. Like, since Graham Mertz, and obviously it's not a good thing that Graham Mertz got hurt, but DJ Lagway was probably playing better than Mertz anyway before that.
yeah,
Um, their
he
schedule is
definitely.
brutal. I think it's Georgia and Texas. Their next 2 games out of their bye week here, and then LSU and Ole Miss.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
they
know where
might
the
not
wins
have an
come
SEC
from,
win
but
left. Yeah.
their offense looks awake now. And I don't know, maybe a new quarterback jump starts things a little bit there. But I'm with you. I have them at 11. 10?
Yeah. Did I say Arkansas yet?
You did
Yeah,
not. Oh,
so
wait, you had them at 11.
yeah, I have Arkansas at 11.
Yeah.
And you had Florida at 11. Okay,
Yeah.
my 10 team. This is where you would start to have a conversation about South Carolina. You got Vanderbilt, Missouri, A&M, kind of all clustered in this next tier together. I'm gonna, as much as it feels like it could really bite me in the butt in a couple weeks. I'm going to put Vandy here at 10 um, until, they continue to prove it. I mean, they've got one of the better wins in the SEC so far this season, but they've still kind of looked pedestrian against lower quality opponents too since then. So
Yeah, I mean they've got a heck of an opportunity this weekend. You talk about 2 weeks against South Carolina, and you're right, but they got Texas coming into Nashville this weekend. I kind of think Texas brings that down to earth a little bit, especially an angry Texas team coming off what happened last week. But yeah, I'm going to put Vandy at 10 as well. Understanding what that could look like here in 2 weeks.
So this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because I think we probably both have some order of A&M, Missouri, and South Carolina next. And of course, South Carolina is going to play both those teams and have an opportunity to move ahead. The way that I see it is that they're going to split those games. So I'm going to put Missouri at 9 and South Carolina at 8 and A&M at 7. We'll see how that actually plays out. Obviously, South Carolina could beat A&M coming out of a bye at home, while A&M's having to play a tough game against LSU next week or this week. But I don't know. If I'm going to have them split, then I'll just put South Carolina in the middle of the two of them.
Yeah, I have South Carolina at 9, even though it's splitting hairs, just because I haven't seen them beat Missouri yet with Drink, and I think A&M's probably a better overall team. Margins are there small. We'll have this conversation. We'll get back on the show next Thursday and talk about South Carolina A&M, and I do think that game's pretty much a coin flip. But South Carolina 9, Missouri 8, A&M 7, and then I think you have a bit of a line break there, even though I know A&M's leading the league right now when you get into the top 6.
Yeah, no, that's how I'm feeling as well. And like we said, South Carolina has an opportunity to be at the top of that tier when all things are said and done. Next up, I would probably have Ole Miss, just because I think that they've shown some up and down sort of play. You could make the argument for Alabama though as well with how they've played the last few weeks, really since the end of the first half of the Georgia game. But I'll still have Ole Miss at 6 right now.
Yeah, this is where it gets really tough. I'm going to put Alabama there. I got to sneeze and it's not coming. That's where the audio is, but okay, I think we're good. Yeah, I don't know. Something's just broken there, and it feels like it's a different thing that's broken every week. You watch the defense get shredded by Vanderbilt, then you go to Tennessee, and I know Tennessee's got a pretty good defense, but it's, what was it, 7 points in the first 3 quarters there. Just feels a little off, and I think they beat Missouri with a half-injured quarterback this weekend, but I don't know. I look at the rest of Alabama's schedule, and it's like, you're probably losing at LSU. I don't want to say probably. I think they're going to lose at LSU in a night game in Death Valley, and that makes them a 3-loss team and not going to a 12-team playoff, which would have been hard to fathom before the year started.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these teams here, well, especially Bama and Ole Miss, who we're talking about, are both kind of fighting for their lives. They both have 2 losses already.
Yeah,
both have.
Ole Miss also play Georgia too.
I would say some tough tests left on the schedule, so really can't slip up, and I think they probably both will, which makes things interesting for that cluster we talked about before too, especially Texas A&M and Missouri, who only have 1 loss so far. So we'll see how that all goes. I mean, it could definitely reshuffle pretty quickly. Who do you have at 4? So I assume
I
you
did
have
have
Ole
Ole
Miss
Miss
at
at 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is where you do start to get into that kind of playoff cut line, I think. I have LSU at 4. I am coming around on them because the offensive line is so good, and I just think that solves so many problems for a football team. All jokes aside about the PFF stat earlier in the year, they haven't given up very many sacks all year. Quarterback play has been good. They've found a running back with Durham. Huge game this weekend in College Station that I'm curious about. But I have LSU at 4. How about you?
I mean, maybe I'm going a little chalky, but I have Tennessee at 4.
Okay.
That they've played well. They have a really good defense. Offensively, Nico eats against inferior defenses, but when he's faced real defenses, he looks like a freshman at times. I think they just have enough deficiencies offensively that uh, I can't put them quite in that upper echelon yet. Whereas LSU, I think they can score with anyone. I mean, we saw them go down 17-0 against South Carolina's pretty good defense, and that still wasn't enough to keep them from clawing their way back into it. So, um, yeah, I have Tennessee floor, LSU. Actually, I have Texas at 3.
Ooh.
I still think there's a little bit of a fraud aspect to them, just a little bit. They're obviously very good. They've proven it a little bit, but I also think that they had some easier legs of the schedule early on, and some of those wins early on don't look quite as good as they did when it happened.
Yeah, that's
So
fair. The Oklahoma win doesn't look as good. The Michigan win doesn't look as good. I get that. I also think people are a little down on Texas right now because what I think we both have at number one is Georgia, and Georgia looks like Georgia again.
yeah.
Really has all year, other than the one half against Alabama. So I get that. Um, I guess just quick question. Like, I'll read you their schedule now, but do you think Texas loses again this year? And the rest of their schedule is starting this weekend. They go to Vanderbilt, then they have their second bye week. Florida comes to Austin, at Arkansas. Texas or Kentucky comes to Austin, and then of course to end the year, the return of the rivalry game with A&M at Texas A&M.
Geez, the SEC really did them a lot of favors, huh? Other than the Georgia game. Um,
Well, there is that.
yeah, but whatever. I mean, I would take the schedule and play Georgia a million times
Sure.
compared to what South Carolina's
Vandy,
schedule was.
Florida, Kentucky, Arkansas,
Yeah. And
and
Mississippi
Mississippi
State.
State too. Yep.
So I think Arkansas could be tricky. It's at Arkansas. And
Yep.
then, of course, the A&M game, who knows what's going to happen there. I think they lose one of those games. Yes.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to have to figure out which one it is.
Man, that
But I
A&M
think
game is
they
going to
lose
be
one of those.
crazy.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, they're probably going to make the playoff. Like, it would be
Yeah.
kind of a disappointment at this point if they didn't. Georgia should make the playoff. I think LSU is starting to creep into that category. What's
So
LSU's
for
end
the
of
sake of this
season?
conversation, here's what LSU has left. Obviously at A&M here this weekend, then their bye week. Bama comes to Death Valley November
Ooh.
9th. Then LSU might be a playoff elimination game. I mean, it would only be LSU's second loss, I guess, but unless they lose this weekend. But A&M, Bama, and then at Florida, and then they end the year with 2 home games against Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, which I think one of those tough and one isn't, but not with the ones you would have thought before the season started.
Yeah, so
They're both a Death
it,
Valley, and I think they win those.
to me, it really depends on what happens this weekend between LSU and A&M, and whichever team wins that game is who I would slot in as likely to make the playoff, and whichever loses, I would say likely to miss because then there's still other hurdles left from there on the schedule. I think Tennessee. What's Tennessee's end of season schedule? Do you have that
Yeah,
pulled up?
I'll get to that right now. I know they still have an FCS or a bye game left too in there somewhere, but so Tennessee's off this weekend, host Kentucky, and then I just had it open. Okay,
I'm
host
sure they
Kentucky,
have
host Mississippi
Vanderbilt.
State. Yep, host Kentucky, host State, go to Georgia, and then they host UTEP, go to Vanderbilt. I think all three of
So
those home games are layups, Kentucky State and UTEP, but at Georgia, at Vandy, um, can maybe afford to lose one of those, get in at 10-2, but definitely can't afford to lose both of those.
yeah, and you do that'll be an interesting case of how they judge the schedule. I mean, the Alabama
Sure.
win looks all right. Depends on how Alabama ends the season. But Tennessee obviously had a pretty weak schedule, and Texas had a pretty weak schedule. So if either of them end up with 2 losses, definitely if they end up with 3 losses, they might be on the borderline. So that'll be interesting to see.
Yep. We've got a listener in the Twitter space now. I think you're muted, by the way, over there, Caleb, from what I'm seeing here. But we've kind of gone through the SEC now and just some bye week thoughts on the roster for South Carolina. I have a couple basketball things just to run by you. Just curious. Start with the men's side. We had media day last week. Here's my question: true or false? Jamari Thomas is the most important player for the men's team this year.
Most important. I think, had one of the biggest holes to fill when
That's
you think
kind of what
about the construction of last year's squad. I do think Jacoby Wright can kind of fill in that way, in a way that, like, if Colin Murray Boyles or someone went down, you just don't have that athlete anywhere else on the floor. Um, so I will say no, but just because of that. But I do think he's very important to how Lamont Paris's offense works, as we saw last year. So uh, can he step up and kind of become that guy? Have you heard any whisperings from the scrimmage against NC State? I've heard a couple. I know that you can't
Yeah,
like share too much, but I guess I'll just say it sounds like it went pretty well.
yeah.
Uh,
I've heard the same.
Competitive against a pretty good team.
Team that went to
So
the Final Four. I know they lost a
yeah,
lot, but a team that went to the Final Four last year.
right.
Um, yeah, that was one thought I had on the men's team. Another one I'm curious about is one of the things Lamont's talked about a lot all summer. He mentioned it in Birmingham Media Days. I talked to him, the player in question, about it a little bit Monday. Zach Davis as an offensive player is interesting to me. I think most of us would agree he's the best on-ball defender this team has. They've almost got specific personnel packages like football for him with that 1-3-1 zone and his defense, but you're going to need more from him offensively this year, I think, just to offset the losses of Cooper and Johnson in the backcourt. I am cautiously optimistic there, just from what it sounds like, A, from what I've heard just in general, and B, what he's talked about with his shot. But I think that's a factor on this team, too, is you're going to need more from Zach Davis on the offensive end.
Well, and to me, just based on the roster construction, it's going to look a little bit different, right? You had Talon Cooper, um, Michi Johnson, and Miles Studi kind of all throwing up threes at times, and BJ Mack at the time. I think you might work it on the interior a little bit more with Colin Murray Boyles, who obviously developed his interior game throughout the season, looked really well. Nick Pringle, Zachary Davis is a guard, but he's a long guard. Jordan Butler, we'll see how he comes along as a
Sure.
sophomore that didn't contribute a
I think
lot
he's going to
last
be a
year.
shooter, too. Like, you're going to see more of him stepping out than people realize for a 7-footer.
But Butler, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got that as part of his game for sure. So I'm also really interested to see what the freshman Cam Scott can do. I think he's going to contribute a good bit
Yeah.
as the season wears
Uh,
on. So
yeah. I still think this is going to be an inside out offense. I think you're, without knowing what Cam Scott looks like yet, I think your two most skilled players offensively are both bigs with CMB and Nick Pringle. You're just going to kind of have to run your offense a little bit inside out, work it through there. That's kind of what I would say.
but I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think
No, I don't either.
we saw at times last year they could beat anyone when the threes were falling, but when the threes were not falling, they were lost. I think that inside out game is a little bit more reliable if that is something that they can pretty consistently score on. So, and
Yeah.
I expect the defense to be good for sure.
Yep. Going on to the women's side now, and we're gonna pick some games this weekend for football. First of all, recruiting news: another 5-star for Dawn Staley today. Ayla McDowell, who's a wing out of Texas, 5-star, had a bunch of other offers, committed to South Carolina this afternoon. First member of the 2025 recruiting class. So that's your first note. My main thing with the women's team right now, look, this roster's loaded. There's 8 McDonald's All-Americans on it. I don't have to tell you guys how good it is. You don't have one button you could press the last 3 years when like a possession breaks down or stalls, which is throw the ball to the 6'7" player. I think Dawn Staley filled in for Lamont or for Shane last night on Carolina Calls because Shane was out recruiting, and she said it's the first time in a decade they don't have one post player that an opponent has to double team, whether that's Asia Wilson, Aaliyah Boston, Camila Cardoso. So that's a question I have. I think there's talent in that post room, but it's going to take a little bit of time to kind of figure out what the best options are there.
Yeah, it might look a little different. I kind of the way they're constructed is a little bit more like one of those mid 2000s UConn teams where you have
Yeah.
a lot of shooters, a lot of speed. Um, I still think the defense is going to be pretty good, but maybe not quite
Yep.
as physically imposing as it has been for most of the last decade. So that will be
Yeah.
interesting.
And I have one other women's question
Yeah.
if you want. So I'm going to give the same speech I gave before last year. Y'all might think that's superstitious or whatever, but I think this team loses a game at some point. I know I was wrong last year. You're playing 8 of the 10 teams ranked 2 through 11 on the schedule. Between non-con and SEC. The schedule's stacked. It's loaded. It's as tough as they've ever played non-con. UConn, UCLA, Duke, Texas twice, LSU, all this. But I know what happened last year. I know they won every game, of course. And 2 years in a row with the undefeated regular season. So I ask, more likely, 2 losses or 0 losses for South Carolina women's basketball in the regular season? Because I think like them going, what would it be, 31-1 might be the most likely. You just slip up some work that's hard to keep doing this, but 2 losses or 0 more likely.
Yeah, I think
just regular season.
I think maybe 2. I think maybe I'd lean 2 losses, but I agree with you that if I wouldn't want to bet it. I would rather just bet the push on 1.
That's kind of what I was thinking too.
But I don't know. To some degree, is the pressure off on having that undefeated season? You already did it, and if you play loose, maybe it kind of comes to fruition naturally. I don't know. We'll see.
Sure. It's hard for me to imagine this team being looser than last year's team. Just, I feel like they never noticed they were undefeated at any point.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, I feel like even we didn't notice until about halfway through the year. You know, we were talking about it like a rebuild and a couple of surprising early wins, and then we're like, oh, I guess they're just going to keep going.
Yeah. Oh, I should also, before I get out of here, mention Joyce Edwards, the true freshman 5-star from Camden. She looks really good. She had a double and a half in their exhibition game at Memphis last week. I know it's an exhibition, but it's still against a D1 school, and she looked like the best player on the floor, including her own teammates. Yeah, they're going to be really good again there, and maybe the dominant post is your true freshman if you have to have one. Maybe it's Joyce right off the bat.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think I heard Don Staley in one of the recent media days reference her that way. So
yeah,
maybe you just said that too. Sorry, I was pulling up an article. But let's look at around the rest of the college football games this weekend. It's still pretty fun weekend, I think. And then we will get out of here and be back next week to check out Texas A&M. But guess what my record was last week in the picks, by the way? Do you already know?
I'm always bad about going back to check, but I feel like you're always in that like 9-1, 10-0 range. So I'm going to guess that again.
I went 10-0 in the straight picks and 7-3 in the against the spread picks. So kind of crazy. I don't know how
to keep 2 weeks in a row with that, because didn't you have those exact same numbers?
Maybe we talked about it on Sunday. Maybe I'm just bragging twice.
I was going to say maybe we talked about it on Oklahoma pod Monday.
But now I can see our season.
You should like that.
Now I can see our season long records, and you must have done pretty well too because you didn't fall too far behind me. I'm at 58-27 in straight picks, and you're at 56-29 in straight picks. I somehow still have a pretty good
pull this up because I filled it out Monday. I don't remember what I said for all the games. Is Syracuse Pitt on there? I'm opening this thing right now. That's happening right now. It started about half an hour ago. And the score is, I'll tell you right now. Yeah. Pitt, by the way, one of 9 undefeated teams left, by the way. Now that Liberty lost to Kennesaw State last night. Pitt's up 10-0. That game's only 6 minutes old. So
we're looking good there. We're looking good. So we both picked to cover that. By the time you hear this, that's probably already over.
It might be Clemson's biggest test left too, by the way, at least in the ACC.
I think so, and I think they have a dangerous offense. I think that's going to be a really fun game. That might be a 40-something to 40-something game.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Next up for this weekend, we got Boise State minus 2.5 at UNLV.
This is fun. This is really fun. It's a Friday night game too. I'm picking the best player in the country in Ashton Jeanty in Boise State, but first to 50 wins.
Yeah, I think that's true. A little bit different styles of play. I'll be interested if Boise State tries to like run the clock a little bit and try to limit UNLV's possessions. But I picked Boise State to win and cover, but I don't feel great about it. I think it's going to be, who scores less. This one's fun to me. I can't wait to watch this one. Notre Dame is minus 11.5 and they're at Navy. Is that right? Or it says versus Navy on our thing.
I think it's neutral site. I don't know. They
Okay,
usually play
that
that
makes
like in
sense.
an NFL stadium or something, but it's not in South Bend. I know that.
That makes sense. 11 and a half seems like a lot of points to me for as good as this Navy team has been, the style of offense that they run. I do pick Notre Dame to win it, but I don't have them covering the 11 and a half.
Yeah, maybe I'm a fool. I kind of buy into Notre Dame. They've won out everyone they've played since the Northern Illinois loss. I still think they're pretty good on both sides of the ball. I think they have a good enough defense to handle what Navy does. They see it every year. The option stuff's not going to be new to them. I'll pick Notre Dame to cover, win by like 14. Speaking of lines that look big, I know Oregon's number 1 in 25 against Illinois, and a pretty good Brett Bielema defense running game.
Yeah, it felt like way too much. We all across the board might be getting suckered into this one. We all picked Oregon to win, but not to cover. One thing I will mention is the not that Illinois is the East Coast, but they got to go 2 time zones.
Yep,
When
good point.
a East Coast team has had to go 2 time zones to the West, it hasn't worked out super well, jet lag, whatever. So maybe that's why it's inflated a little bit. But yeah, I still think Illinois can keep it closer than 25. That's a lot of points.
Yeah, and I'm with you. Just even if nothing else, just what Bielema does in the clock and the running game, and man, like Oregon could win this game like 34-10 and not cover. Like I'll give me Illinois with that. Bama 13 and a half favorites at home against Missouri. Brady Cook is questionable, I think, on the first availability report. He went to the hospital and came back mid-game last week. You do the math. Bama bounces back here if it's a backup quarterback for Mizzou, right? I think the question is just if Brady Cook plays.
I think he would play though, right? He came back mid-game, so I don't know why he wouldn't play with a week of rest. But
is he 100%?
Probably not. Yeah. And also, I think
what if we just didn't play the football game and we had Ryan Williams and Luther Burden just like do a route running competition or something?
Who would win that? Maybe I still think I would
have
give
the
edge
two best receivers in the country here in this game, honestly.
Yeah. I would give the edge to Burden maybe just for his extra couple years of polish, but it would be close. But yeah, we both picked Bama to win, both picked him to cover. I think Bama lets out some frustration. I think Mizzou's been playing with fire for a little bit, and they finally get burned.
Yep. So we're staying on the SEC, staying in that same time slot. I think this is the 4:15 game on SEC Network. Texas, favored by 18, coming off a loss, going to the construction zone known as Vanderbilt Stadium, whatever it's called. I picked the Horns to win and not cover because I think Diego Pavia can do enough offensively, and maybe it ends up like 38-21 Texas or 41-24 or something. You stay inside that 18. But I did pick the Horns to win and bounce back in Nashville.
That's where I'm at. I have Vandy playing a tough game. I think they elevate for stuff like this. Maybe they have a home field advantage now after what happened a few weeks ago. At the very least, I think a few more Vandy fans probably bought some tickets than they did to the Bama game. But yeah, I still think Texas outlasts them. Kind of an interesting one. I actually don't. Is this Utah State at Wyoming?
This is 2 1-6 teams, and I think Steven's messing with us. Just having it on here.
He's trying to give me a loss.
They're both 1-6. I picked Wyoming at home because they're a little. I'd say they're tough to beat there, but they're 1-6, so maybe they're not. Do you have thoughts on the 2 worst teams in the Mountain West and the 2 Wyoming favored by 2?
I know. I'm trying to read what Steven wrote about it because I don't know much about either of these teams, honestly. So apparently, Iowa quarterback Spencer Petras is at. Oh my God, where is it? Is that Utah State? Both these teams have had
here.
So Utah State apparently has the best offense in the Mountain West. Wyoming has the worst offense in the Mountain West.
But they're 1-6. Like,
yeah, very interesting. I mean, after reading this, it makes me want to pick Utah State, but I picked Wyoming, and I think I'm going to be wrong.
Wyoming does have a conference win this year, and Utah State doesn't. That's something.
Yeah, and it's at Wyoming.
Mountain West play.
It's at Wyoming, but
Yeah.
Utah State probably also has played at elevation before, so I don't know if that matters that much.
Yeah. Wyoming's one conference win, and their only win against anybody this season was against Air Force, who's 1-6 as well. So
Yeah,
not
I have
great. The bottom
regrets.
of the Mountain West. I think we just stick to UNLV and Boise State for the Mountain West this weekend. Um, okay, Penn State. This feels like a trap game. Look ahead at Ohio State, or playing Ohio State next week. Penn State favored by 6.5 at Wisconsin in a night game at Camp Randall.
I feel like it's already baked in though, all that you said, because I think Penn State's a lot better than Wisconsin, and I think that's
Yeah,
a
no, I
pretty
picked Penn State to cover. I just wanted to
yeah.
set the stage there a little bit for why this might be
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think on neutral side or whatever, they're probably a double-digit favorite here. So, I think that they did bake that in already. Yeah, no, they're not going to have any problem.
Yeah, I think it's the big question. This is the year Penn State can finally beat Ohio State, and we'll get into that next week, I guess. But all right, the game that I think is most interesting to South Carolina fans, A&M, the week before coming to Columbia, playing at home against LSU. A&M is favored by 2.5, which feels trappy, but it is a night game at Kyle Field.
Yeah, the home field advantage is going to be interesting. I think A&M has a defense that can slow LSU down a bit. I still think LSU has kind of proven that they can score on anyone, and I don't know if Connor Wegman can quite keep up, but it'll be fun to watch. I pick LSU to win and cover, but I don't feel great about it because it's on the road.
What's better here if you're a South Carolina fan? Like, it's probably an A&M win, right? Just to like have another top 10 team coming in, and you're not coming in off a loss. Like, I feel like every game South Carolina has played this year, their opponents come in off a loss. That's not accurate, obviously, but it feels pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the big important ones, that's been the case, I think. So I like chaos, and I also like the idea that if they win next week, we get to start talking about really crazy end of season scenarios. And the only reason that, or the only way that'll happen, is if everyone that South Carolina plays and maybe beats down the stretch continues to win football games. So yeah, I think
Sure.
A&M needs to win, come in as a top 10 team, and then you have a lot bigger slingshot to ride, I guess, if you do beat A&M after that.
I should point out, in the time that we've been doing the staff picks, Kyle McCord has thrown his second pick six of the first quarter. It is 17-0 Pitt.
Man, we should have put money on that before.
There's still, this feels like the South Carolina Oklahoma start last week. 2 defensive touchdowns in the first half of the first quarter.
That'll do it. A kind of intriguing one, I think, in the ACC. Duke is sitting at 5-1 or 6-1.
6-1. Yep.
And SMU is also near the top of the conference. SMU
also 6-1, and they're undefeated in the league.
But a pretty big favorite, minus 11.5 at Duke. Seems like a lot of people are not believing in the Blue Devils. I have SMU winning that, but not covering, because that's a lot of points for a road game against a kind of similar opponent. And though I do think SMU is probably better than Duke, I don't know about how much better yet at this juncture. I do think they have a lot of potential in that conference as they bring in more and more money than they have for quite some time. And they have a lot of resources and stuff already built in. So I'm excited to see. I mean, who knows how long the ACC actually survives, but if it does, I'm excited to see the rise of SMU.
Yeah. Duke's got a pretty game defense. Even their one loss, they only gave up 24 points. Actually, I'm looking at this now. Duke has not allowed more than 24 in any game all year. SMU's got a good offense, obviously, but that's a lot of points to cover against a good defense. So I'll take Duke to cover at home. And Caleb looks like he left the studio here. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. I don't know what just happened, but we're pretty much done with the picks anyway. This has been the game. Oh, there he is. I was about to wrap it up anyway, but I picked SMU to win, not cover. So I have a pretty big SMU Pitt game next week with ACC implications. That's going to do it this week. Stick around, Rivals Gamecock on Twitter, GamecockScoop.com, more bye-week coverage, all the good stuff there. in the weekend, and we'll be back next week to preview a pretty big game against Texas A&M.
Yeah, give you a full hour here, so we won't be around on Sunday. We're gonna sleep in, but we'll see you next week.